the Bible presents the world that we live in as an unseen and a seen that are integrated. Organic-based humans and the flora and the fauna on the earth in the seen world that adheres to the laws of physics and nature that we all know. Well, scientists know. And so the naturalist can discover true things about the world. And the Christian, the biblical Christian, can gain a lot from science and scientific discovery. But the Christian is always recognizing that the physical is only a subset of the real reality, the bigger reality. And that's really important to understand. And that has flow-on effects to the Christian idea of psychology and other things that we'll go into later. When God created the world, what that means is that it's not the product of chaos or random chance or natural processes, but he created it in an orderly and deliberate way. And it operates in a discoverable manner, in a purpose, with a purpose and meaning intrinsic to it. It was made with meaning and purpose in mind. The seen world is very complicated, but it is logically ordered and discoverable. But the Bible is clear that shadows of the unseen can be cast in the seen world. So on the one hand, Christians believe and use the scientific method. Christians aren't against science. In fact, science and its methods were developed largely within and complementary to the Christian worldview, not, as some might say, despite it.
From your book, The Return of the God Hypothesis, in 1277, Etienne Tempier, the Bishop of Paris, writing with the support of Pope John the 21st, condemned Necessarian theology and 219 separate theses influenced by Greek philosophy about what God could or couldn't do, close quote. Now that's a mouthful, and it seems just unbelievably abstruse. What on earth has that got to do with the scientific method?
Let's unpack that, because it's actually fairly clear. The Greeks always are the great histories of the Western intellectual tradition, and so they should be. They gave us philosophy, Plato and Aristotle, but Greek science was impeded by assumptions that the Greeks made about the nature of nature. They assumed that built into nature was a kind of intrinsic logic that they characterized as the logos. And so they also assumed that the order that in nature was governed by this logic, so that whatever seemed most logical to us was also what was built into nature, was logic. It was the logical form of the order in nature. So what's the most logical and perfect form of motion? It's a circle. So how do the planets go, what are planetary orbits? What kind of shape do they have? It must be circular. And there were numerous logically deduced conclusions about nature that were not empirically grounded.
So the Greeks worked things out in theory and assumed that they worked that way in practice.
Exactly. So they did a lot of armchair philosophizing about nature. It wasn't that they weren't interested in nature, or they didn't assume that there was an order there, but they assumed it was an order that had to be a certain way, the way that appeared most logical to them.
Okay, and now again from the Return of the God Hypothesis, the order in nature could have been otherwise. The job of the natural philosopher, the old term for scientists, the job of the natural philosopher was not to ask what God must have done, but what God actually did, close quote.
And that
intellectual presupposition is unique to the West.
Yes, and the idea is that, yes, there's an order in nature, but it's an order that's impressed upon nature or engraved upon nature from the outside, because there was a creator who chose the form of order that would be manifest in creation. We have to go and look and see which form it is. When I was teaching, I used to use the example of paintbrushes with my students, show them all the different kinds of paintbrushes that a painter could use. All of them manifest a form-function relationship, a kind of orderliness, but the painter could choose which one he or she wants to use for the particular application in mind. In the same way, God, in providing, for example, the law of gravity, could have chosen to had a gravitational attraction much stronger or weaker. It has an inverse square law in Newton's formulation, but it might have been an inverse cubed law. It might not have had an exponent in the denominator at all. It could have been entirely different. There's an order, but which order is up for us to go and to discover. And that quote that you just attributed to me is almost a direct paraphrase of Robert Boyle, who said that the job of the natural philosopher is not to look at what God must have done, not to decide what God must have done, but to go and look and to see what he actually did do.
Remember C.S. Lewis? I've got another quote from him. This is really cool. The naturalists have been engaged in thinking about nature. They have not attended to the fact that they are thinking. The moment one attends to this, it is obvious that one's own thinking cannot be merely a natural event, and that therefore something other than nature exists.